Hello, everyone. Welcome to our weekly chats. Thanks for joining me. Again, I appreciate this opportunity to chat about local history and get your questions in a different way. I'm used to writing, but talking about it is great too. And this week, the question actually comes from the weather and a conversation I was having. Of course, it's snowing today. It's Tuesday, and it's snowing outside today, but we had a spectacular weekend of summer like weather. I think it was a record setting, actually, historic record. And we can talk about weather a different time and how whether or not weather, what we experience as weather today when we think it's unprecedented, and it really isn't always. But the people were out and about, and they were hiking and walking and doing all summer things in April because the weather was so nice. And one of the conversations that came up because people were out hiking and walking in one of our wonderful parks. We have a lot of parks here in East Aurora, but one of them is Majors Park, and it's at this right off the southern end of the village, off of South Street and off of Olean Road. And one of the questions I get asked a lot as summer approaches and as people are out and about hiking is, what is the story behind this rusty old bridge that is just off a path in Majors Park? And I noticed it when I was walking through there. It's near the creek, but it's not actually going over the creek, and it's embedded in the ground, and it's rusty and it's old, and it's not even a bridge anymore. It's just kind of the top portion of it. Um, and people all the time are asking, and I think someone one time posted on Facebook, asking what's the story of this bridge, and some of the answers that people were giving were intriguing, but not necessarily true. And some of the things were, some of the conjecture was that, and theories was that perhaps this bridge that's seemingly in the middle of nowhere right now, maybe Olean Road, Route 16, which is nearby, once went through what is today Majors Park, and that bridge was to get over the creek there. Another theory was that the railroad, which is actually on the eastern side of Olean Road, that perhaps at one time the railroad went through what is today Majors Park, and the railroad went across at that point across that branch of Cazenovia Creek, um, and that theory is advanced by the idea that that bridge is a railroad bridge and it looks like a railroad bridge. And then some more creative theories included the idea that maybe pranksters somehow just took this bridge and plopped it there in the middle of Majors Park, what is today's Majors Park. Again, as intriguing as all those stories are, none of those are true. And the reason we know this is because someone wrote down their recollection and their family story, and they wrote it down to give us the true story about it. Um, I did go looking through old newspapers to try to figure out where this bridge came from, and I had no luck. But Mrs. Betty Butlin, who is now passed away, her husband George was a descendant of the Butlin family, and they owned a huge swath of that land, which is now part of Majors Park. She wrote down, so apparently the intrigue over this bridge wasn't a new phenomena, because she must have been getting asked, because she typed up and wrote out this little note um, explaining the bridge. So she must have been asked, and so she explained the story. And the story is that uh, that the family had the opportunity to get this old bridge, and of course this story was passed from her husband, who got it from his family, to her, and then she finally wrote it down. But she had said when the Butlin farm on Olean Road was in operation, a bridge was needed to connect farmland on both sides of Cazenovia Creek. And when an old railroad bridge was scheduled for replacement in Buffalo, the Butlin family saw an opportunity. And according to Bedley Butlin, the Butlins bought the old bridge, and it was transported to East Aurora on the railroad for use on the farm. So apparently it was brought um, to the farm off of what is today South Street and Olean Road. by the railroad, and the nearby railroad played a role in that. And then they placed it there for their animals to get back and forth over the creek, and themselves to get over back and forth over the creek. And that was an issue. It's an issue even today. There's been discussion of how to connect the two sides of Majors Park. So the story is they just needed a bridge to get from one side of their farm to the other. And when an old railroad bridge was put out of commission in Buffalo, they bought it and transported it to East Aurora on the railroad, which would have stopped nearby. And they would have taken it, presumably on a truck or something, to the farm and placed it over the creek. Now the creek has changed its path over the years, and it no longer flows under the bridge. So the bridge actually, even though it's near the creek, Casanova Creek, when you go into Majors Park, it's actually embedded in the ground nearby. So it looks like it's doing nothing, but at one point it did something. It connected both sides of the Butland farm. So eventually that farmland was sold to a couple people, but to Mr. Majors, that's who the park is named after. And when the town acquired the park, or the farmland, it became a park. And now everybody can go in and see this bridge. So if you're going toward the back of the north section of the park as you make your way around, and it's off a path, this bridge, and I'll post a picture of it from a couple years ago in the comments here. But this is just an interesting story that over time has gotten different theories. But the one reason we know the answer is because Mrs. Butland at one point was asked to write it down. And we have that personal history. So again, that goes along with the importance of diaries and writing down your personal experiences, because this is a perfect example of I could not find anywhere in the newspaper record of this bridge. And so the only explanation we have of it is Mrs. Butland writing down that family history that had been passed down from one generation to the next. And the one question that does remain is when this bridge was moved to that farm. I was not able to find it in the newspapers. Mrs. Butland failed to mention that little detail. She probably didn't know. Perhaps she didn't have that information. But we don't know that information, and I couldn't find it in the newspaper, even with a digital search. So I couldn't track that part of it down, and I'll continue to work on that. But that's the story of the rusty old bridge in Majors Park. Wasn't part of a railroad bridge. It wasn't part of Route 16, and the road never went through what is today Majors Park. It was just an old, out of commission bridge that the family that owned the land was able to buy and bring to East Aurora to make their lives easier by enabling them to get from one side of their farmland to the other. And this wasn't this was a common thing, actually. People would build bridges or acquire old bridges in order to do that across creeks on their farmlands, and some of them remain. And this bridge that you see in Majors Park when you're off on hikes is part of the old farmland history, if you will, of that land that you're not walking on. Today it's a park, but it was an active farm back in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and that bridge is part of that history. So that's the story behind it. So again, thanks for the questions, and please bring more questions. And if again, this topic came about just from a conversation I was having that reminded me of this. I've written about this before. I actually wrote a whole article about this bridge in Majors Park, but this recent conversation brought the topic back up again. So I love talking about that, of course. So if you have any ideas, pop them in the comments, or send me a private message. And again, we'll see you next week. And if you like what you see, please comment or share. And if you're not following the page, please do. See you next time.